It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun, Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, a big shout out to everybody out there listening on the RealAg Radio podcast. Of course, in Canada, in the U.S., and beyond, it is great to have you here as well. Well, it's Friday, and it's been a busy week. Indeed, there's a lot happening in the world of agriculture as seeding and planting sort of continue. A lot of wet weather in parts of the country in North America. We've got big storms happening in parts of the U.S. as well. And so it's been one of those kind of weeks indeed. Today on the show, we've got Ann Wasko here from the Gateway Livestock Exchange for a beef market update. Lots happened. We're in the middle of grilling season, everybody. We're coming off the Canada Day not Canada Day. The Victoria Day long weekend, as well as Memorial Day long weekend in the U.S. here is this weekend. So busy. We'll also be joined by Kelvin, Heppner, and Lyndsey Smith here for the RealAg Issues Panel, both of them, of course, from RealAgriculture.com. We got a lot of stuff to talk about in the world of agriculture. We'll hit on the railway strike, what's happening there. We've got some updates on the Conservatives attacking the Liberals when it comes to funding 4-H. All that and a whole lot more. If you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Of course, you can also find us across all the different social media platforms, or we'd love to hear from you on the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we've got Ann Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. We're talking cattle markets right after this.
I am Lyndsey Smith. Joining me to talk about Manipulator PGR is Jamie Stringham, National Sales Manager for Belgium, Canada. Why is now a good time to choose Manipulator PGR?
A product needs to provide positive return on investment for you, a producer. What's the point of even using it? Manipulator's been around in Canada now. It was first registered on wheat in 2014. Here we are at 2024. We're registered for wheat, barley, and oat. And we've seen excellent results under a variety of crop conditions. Benefits of harvestability, yield bump, lodging protection, widest window of application of any PGR in Canada. All that being said, it's a simple answer. Don't take my word for it at all. You need to try Manipulator on your farm, see how it works with your schedule, what kind of return it gives you on your investment. Talk to your retailer, split a couple of fields, measure carefully your yield difference, your harvesting ease difference, and your lodging difference. And, I know if you try it, you'll be really happy with the results.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Pete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. Let's talk about the cattle markets here on RealAg Radio. It's time for the beef market update, of course, with Ann Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Ann, how are we doing?
I am great today, Shaun. Thanks.
Well, it's because it's raining again. Is that
it's
why?
Raining again. It's crazy.
What a reversal! You think about where we and we're not perfect, but where we are today in a good swath of, especially in the dry, the real dry area, where we are today versus where we were 60 days ago versus last year, the year before. Wow, what a turnaround.
What a turnaround. And in terms of timing, when you're talking particularly from a cattle producer, grass, in terms of getting the moisture in time for the grass and the hay, we're ticking all the boxes. This is great.
Yeah. How does that adjust plans? Or what are some of the considerations the rancher's going through right now?
Well, coming into the year, we were still hearing lots about, the drought concerns. And of course, the moisture through the winter was sketchy. And so that was, in the back of everyone's mind, am I going to have to once again make changes in terms of marketing early or this or that. So for the first time in a long time, it feels like we're back to normal. Hey, we can just run the cattle we're going to run, and we'll deal with it this fall. So yeah, no, things are feeling good. It kind of feels like this is the first normal year in a long time.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Well, very well deserved. There's been a lot of adversity trying to fight through some of the dry conditions. So, hey, update on the cash markets. What's happened this week?
Okay, well, a good week again in the U.S. And remember, this is our going into the U.S. long weekend, the Memorial Day weekend coming up here. So a solid week in the South, Texas and Kansas, they were up $1 again. So 187. Shaun, that's going to be the highest price fed cattle prices in the U.S. since March. So, we took that big dip after the first news around AI, and now markets are slowly working their way back in the north. So that Nebraska area, $2 higher live, 192, and on the dress side, 2 to 4 higher, 302 to 304 delivered dress. So a good solid market as we head into the long weekend for the U.S. Now on the cutout side, we did have a smaller kill last week. It was under 600,000. This week will be back up just over. But those things kind of shorted the beef supply a little bit, and we saw that cutout come up last week. Now this week, the cutouts kind of stalled. It looks like the buyers, retail buyers have determined we've got enough to get through the long weekend. Let's see what happens. So the choice cutout closed last night just below a week ago, 309.85. The select is about $10 back. Again, I think retailers are going to watch, see how trade goes this weekend to see how much do they step back into the market for Father's Day, kind of the next big beef weekend, if you will. So I would suggest that markets are kind of playing out as I would have expected. The other news from the U.S. that we'll have later today is their May 1 cattle on feed report. And the expectations going into this afternoon is smaller April placements, larger April marketings. There was a couple of extra days in April, if you're wondering why was it bigger. And so the on-feed number for May 1st, we're hoping will finally drop below a year ago. Maybe only 0.5%, maybe 1%, but it'll be the kind of the first time in a while where we're finally seeing U.S. cattle on-feed numbers drop below a year ago. In Canada, here in Western Canada, we've been 2% below a year ago for a bit now. So it'll be good, I think, even kind of mentally to get that number back below a year ago that we've been watching for. The one last thing I did want to mention on the U.S., Shaun, was steer carcass weights continue to climb. Normally at this time of year, weights are coming down. And so they've been going up. Last week's weight in the U.S. was 923. That's 32 pounds over last year. And again, it's that classic. We're putting pounds on for a lot less dollars. The cost of gain is less than the dollars, the value of the cattle. So the economics make sense. We've said all along that we know this is the condition for 24 and we're going to put more weight on cattle, and that's exactly what cattle feeders are doing. So we'll watch that one. Kind of flip it to, let's take it back into Western Canada here. Pretty much a steady week in terms of where the fed cattle traded this week in Alberta. 432 to 433 delivered dressed was the market. It didn't feel quite as, there wasn't as much activity, not as quite as many cattle at the high end of the range. So last week, if you recall, the average in Alberta was 260. That was an all-time high for the Canfax weekly average. We might not get there this week. It'll be close, but maybe we look back and say last week was the all-time high for the spring. But again, we're not done yet. Carcass weights in Canada, we did get a little more current here in Western Canada. Our weights 2 weeks ago down to 903 for steers. So that's only 12 pounds over a year ago, so in a little better shape. I think the Western Canadian cattle feeder got more current than his American comrade. Our basis got so strong. We know when we've got strong basis here, it can be pretty fickle. So you better sell when you've got those opportunities. And so I do think cattle feeders sold into this market. So we're going to, if you're an Alberta cattle feeder, for the most part, I think you're going to go into June really current. The industry is going to be super current as we head into what I still expect to be the summer doldrums.
And when you are current like this at this time of the year, it does give you, it adds some flexibility to what the business plan can be going forward to finish out the year.
Yeah, bargaining position, bargaining power, leverage. So there's lots of things we talk about in terms of where you sit from a marketing perspective. And then, of course, that helps making the plans down the road. You know, we've got these pens that, you know, now we can kind of plan in terms of how we're going to fill those pens going forward. Yeah.
Memorial Day weekend this weekend, coming off Victoria Day long weekend in Canada. So we're kind of in this very, very good grilling period of the year. Demand. Let's talk about that, because a lot of focus on beef prices, and we've been talking. Oh, it feels like 4 years about how high can beef prices go, and will the consumer continue to support beef as a source of protein? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, it is. And I think, there's no question. Yes, beef prices at the counter are higher for sure. We talked about, I think, that on the show 2 weeks ago, Shaun, the last data that came out from StatsCan actually showed March's prices coming down from where we were in Feb. So we'll see what the April prices look like. But bottom line is, when you're measuring demand, it's not just measuring that price at the counter. It's how much beef is being sold at the value of that product. And so, and CattleFacts just talked about this again this past week on one of their webinars, that demand continues to be very solid for the first part of 24. Yes, it's not 21 and 22, but so far, third best year in history. So again, prices are higher, but there's less beef to sell as we go forward. And that's really what we got to remember, what we're talking about when we measure demand. So demand is still certainly holding together very well through the spring of 24.
It's good because of the supply. We need it, right? We could not afford a demand clip here. We need to continue to be strong in this area for sure, domestically and internationally.
Yeah, we need that. Of course, if you're a cattle feeder, in terms of profitability, where we're sitting now at these record high prices, you need that to be able to turn some profits. So we need, if we're going to keep the industry profitable going forward here, we're going to need to keep prices solid all the way through.
Hey, let's finish up cow market. What have you been seeing?
Another great week. It's going to get quiet in the auction markets for feeder cattle and calves. But the slaughter cow market, very solid. Last week, CanFax reported another record high for D2 slaughter cows in Alberta, 185. That's $37 a hundred higher than this time last year. So crazy. And I'll tell you, Shaun, I don't think it's over yet, because typically last year the highs were made in June for cows. I think we still got more room ahead.
Very interesting. Hey, Ann, thanks so much for joining us here this week on the Beef Market Update. All the best to you, and enjoy riding that horse in that tall grass.
I will, and have fun on a long weekend, Shaun.
Yeah, wait till we get some heat.
Oh, you'll hear it growing from there.
It's going to explode. Okay, that is Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, joining us every 2 weeks for the Beef Market Update. We'll be right back here on RealAg Radio with the RealAg Issues Panel. Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, standing by. We'll get to the top issues of the week right after this.
We have the financial tool you're looking for. A cash advance from Canadian Canola Growers Association is a financial tool for farmers that offers flexible short-term financing. Borrow your first $250,000 interest-free in 2024 and the rest below prime. Put your advance to work in whatever ways make sense for your operation. Apply on over 50 commodities. Call our experienced team or visit ccga.ca. Cash advances are made under the Government of Canada's Advance Payments Program.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. It's now time, like we do every Friday, for the RealAg Issues Panel. This segment's brought to you, but we've got a very, very important notice, okay? This is a message from the Government of Canada. Pay attention, everybody. Important notice for grain farmers. The Canadian Grain Commission has revoked the licenses of Global Food and Ingredients, Inc. They're also known as GFI. If this company owes you money for grain deliveries, you need to call 1-800-853-6705 immediately. That number is 1-800-853-6705. 6705. Well, do it after you finish listening to the show. You don't need to call like during the show. You can finish the show and then call. Okay. Okay, here we go. We got Lyndsey Smith joining us from RealAgriculture, of course, in Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are you doing?
Quite well, thank you. It's
Yeah?
so we had a bit of a heat wave this week, which I think many farmers were thankful for because definitely the field work has ramped up with that drying. It did, though, bring a lot of storms. We had a very volatile Wednesday, but it was hot and muggy, and everyone knows how much I love humidity. I don't. But today is like 18 degrees and sunny and windy, and it's great. So it's like perfect Lyndsey weather.
Yeah. Well, I'm broadcasting today from, I've got a baseball tournament this weekend in Missoula, Montana for my youngest boy. And it was a very crisp 3 degrees Celsius this morning here.
Chilly.
Snow fell in parts of Montana yesterday. There was a winter advisory warning for parts of Montana. But you know what? We're seeing some moisture on the Western Canadian prairies, which is also a positive. Hellish storms across parts of the Midwest here today. I was traveling yesterday going through Minneapolis and tons of cancellations. I think Illinois is getting hit very hard today. Iowa, where it talks about derecho on the weather reports this morning. So stay safe out there, everybody. Also joining us is Kelvin Heppner coming out of Manitoba. Hey, Kelvin, how are you? I was in your province yesterday.
Yes, you were in Winnipeg, and we are also enjoying some of that weather. And we've had over an inch of rain so far today, the last time I checked the gauge. So very welcome, as there was a lot of planting progress in our area this week and yesterday. A lot of long days. And I think in many cases, I've talked to farmers, neighbors around here, soybeans went in and just edible beans left to plant next week. So it's a catch-up day around here, catching up on things on the yard and sleep, I think, in many cases after some long nights in the field.
Yeah. You know, it's good to see. Like I've had a few people that have sent me text messages this week saying like, "Oh, don't play up how much moisture we've had. It's, we got a long ways to go." And God, it's okay.
It's okay.
Like I'm in an area, people, where it has not rained in like 6 years. Okay. It's okay that we can celebrate. We're getting some moisture. Yeah. Yes. We've got a long ways to go in the growing. So let's just be happy about it.
And we're the opposite.
Okay.
We're just happy that we had some drying happen.
Exactly.
And could get rolling. So it's good.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's nice to see. Lots of planting done.
Now, this was a story that I think we should give ourselves credit for. We broke this story. It had to do with federal government cuts to 4-H. Now we had info about this story going back months. Okay, Lyndsey, we published the story probably 2 months ago. I think about
it was early March.
I was going to say, March-ish. Yep.
Kelvin, why this week? Are the Conservatives out hammering? You know, and before I ask you that question, let's play for the audience what the Shadow Minister for Agriculture with the Conservatives said this week in the House of Commons regarding federal cuts to 4-H, and then I'll get you to say, talk about the why of it. Here it is.
Worth the cost to Canadian farmers, this time cutting funding to one of our most successful volunteer organizations. For 111 years, 4-H Canada has been teaching Canadian youth about community, farming, and leadership. But in one of his first moves, the Liberal Agriculture Minister celebrated this incredible milestone by slashing funding to 4-H by 30%, forcing them to restructure and putting incredible programs like the Citizenship Congress at risk. 4-Hers learn by doing, working hard to promote sustainable agriculture and teaching Canadians about where their food comes from. Conservatives understand the importance of Canadian agriculture and being a champion.
Okay, so that's a portion of the clip from Shadow Minister of Agriculture, John Barlow, this week in the House of Commons. Kelvin, why now? How did this issue come about?
I think the main reason is this week was John Barlow mentioned the 4-H Citizenship Congress that took place, the 51st annual 4-H Citizenship Congress took place in Ottawa this week. So I think it had to do with that. They tied it in with some of the 4-Hers that were probably in the gallery there for a question period earlier in the week. So, and largely, I think in terms of new information, there wasn't a lot of new info that has come out since we reported this back in March. But they've been sitting on it and chose to make it a big deal and hammer down on it this week with the 4-Hers in Ottawa.
And making a big promise, too. It wasn't a part of that clip. I had cut it off before John continues saying, a conservative government will put this funding back in place.
Which is noteworthy. That's noteworthy because the Conservatives haven't been making a whole lot of specific promises like that as to what they would do in government, but to specifically say that we would restore this funding to 4-H, that is something that is on the record now for future reference.
Yeah, maybe that's maybe it shows we're getting a little bit closer to election. We're starting to get some campaign promises, Lyndsey.
Maybe. I know there were definitely some rumblings in the last week of, we did see, of course, the UK is going to an election all of a sudden this week. They'll be going to an election in early July. Does that mean this is like a new trend that we're going to see heading to elections early? Maybe. I guess we'll find out. I too, though, I think it was interesting to see this, finally come up. I thought it was, I don't know, this is my perception, but I think when we broke that 4-H story, we had a lot of feedback, a lot of interest from the audience, people sharing, that they thought this was, not a cool move at all, and that we need to support 4-H and support our youth in agriculture. But I didn't hear a ton of it, beyond those of us talking about it. So clearly it wasn't missed by the Conservatives at all, but they've chosen, I guess, a strategic time to bring it up and make something about it. And as for campaign promises, keep them coming. We'd love to know more of what you're going to do.
I think it's going to be really fascinating, interesting, however you want to phrase that. Kelvin he loves when I say it's going to be interesting because that's such an easy cop out. To be self-conscious, but it is. So I've shifted to fascinating. So it's going to be fascinating to see as we do go through a campaign, the promises that are made. I think there's an expectation on both sides of the aisle potentially that we could move more into being a fiscal hawk and austerity and trying to find some savings, but it's really hard for governments to do that. It's easier to promise spending, Kelvin.
For sure, and that's kind of been the environment we've been in for the last, you could say a few decades in terms of how the direction that policy's gone in terms of governments running bigger and bigger deficits, especially over the last 5 or so years. But I think that we are still going to not see many promises going forward from the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre is only going to, I think, strategically promise as much as they have to, not any more than that, because they don't want to have to take sides on issues that are potentially wedge issues or controversial to any part of their potential voter base. The Liberals may have to make some more promises, but it's right now, I think Poilievre probably tries to just stay out of trouble, and that might involve just making a few big bold promises, kind of like they have already in terms of ending the carbon tax and just headline issues like that. I'm not sure that we'll actually see a whole lot of specifics, which is, again, why this was kind of unique and noteworthy that John Barlow mentioned the specific restoration of funding to 4-H.
Yeah. Lyndsey, we had the second dairy farmer, or dairy worker, I should say, test positive for HPAI this week too, which is not great news at all.
No, it's not. And certainly something that we're following closely. CFIA has been sending updates. I don't think there's any time schedule that I can allude to, but they're at least keeping us posted on the testing that's happening of milk products. What we know about the worker in the U.S., so this is the second dairy farm worker, is what they're saying. This person is in Michigan. They tested positive after feeling unwell, and it was an eye test. So it sounds like it's presenting as conjunctivitis, so it was an eye swab that tested positive for HPAI. So this is only the second, as I said, since this outbreak. And if one of the sources said this is only the third person in the U.S., but this is the second associated with this outbreak within dairy cattle. We are up to 51 herds as of yesterday that have tested positive in 9 different states for HPAI in dairy cattle. So it is certainly showing up in many areas. As far as what we have for Canada, the last issue from CFIA is that we have not had a positive test of any cattle in Canada as of yesterday. They're saying that, and they are now up to 303 retail milk samples where they have not found any fragments of HPAI. So in the U.S., they did find fragments. So these are not parts of the virus that can cause sickness, but they did find fragments of HPAI in milk, in pasteurized milk. And so the CFIA has taken the step to be monitoring the retail system. But all negative across the board in Canada at this point. We also don't know certainly how that worker is doing, but reports are that the symptoms are mild. And again, pink eye, basically, conjunctivitis is the main symptom.
But severe pink eye, right? I think it's not.
Well,
pink eye.
I don't know that pink eye is ever unsevere, to be
There's
honest.
no such thing as pleasant pink eye. Okay.
There's no pleasant pink eye. So, but it does not seem to be just like this virus in cattle. Certainly a detriment to milk production, but it's not nearly the lethal disease that it is in poultry. So here's the difference as well. And the CDC, so the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the U.S., are saying that they are looking at the virus itself to try and figure out if they can pinpoint what is different between this virus in cattle now and the fact that, it doesn't make cattle as ill as it does birds. So is it something about the animal, or is it something about the virus that's potentially different? So that's what we're finding out. And it seems that in humans, this particular strain seems to cause pink eye, not respiratory distress. So there you go. Okay.
We've got more coming up here on the RealAg Issues Panel. There was a big meeting in Phoenix, Arizona this week to do with trade between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. What was discussed and what wasn't? You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Dad, we missed the window for a PGR in our cereals.
Why didn't you add it to the herbicide?
What?
With Manipulator PGR, we can apply as early as one tiller. Just add it to the herbicide, no separate pass.
Don't miss out. Manipulator PGR is proven in wheat, durum, barley, and oats to shorten plants and even out the main stem and tillers. This results in reduced lodging risk, improved harvest efficiency, and increased yield. Talk to your crop protection retailer for more info and to confirm acceptable tank mixes.
CDC Endure is a new oat line from Alliance Seed. High yielding with excellent disease resistance and the quality end users ask for, all in one great oat variety. CDC Endure provides the high beta-glucan levels to make heart-healthy products like breakfast cereals. For more information on CDC Endure oats, as well as any other products from Alliance Seed, check out allianceseed.com or visit any Alliance Seed authorized retailers.
Well, now that we've established that there's some rain in parts of the prairie, especially some of that grass country, you have no excuse, Saskatchewan. You need to be at the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association AGM that's happening June 9th through the 11th. It's in Speedy Creek, Swift Current, Saskatchewan. Registration is now open. You can visit skstockgrowers.com for more information and to register. So hopefully you're going to have a great turnout for that meeting. People should be in a little bit of a better mood this year with some of the precipitation as well as some of the market conditions indeed. Okay, we're continuing on with the RealAg Issues Panel. Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture. And I want to encourage everybody to go to RealAgriculture.com here over the weekend to keep up to speed on what is happening in our industry. Where do we want to go next? Hey, big meeting in Arizona. I don't know why you do these kind of meetings in Arizona in January, not in May, the end of May, headed into June. It was just under 100 degrees Fahrenheit this week in Arizona, but that's where Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., the trade portfolios or representatives got all together. And it looked like kind of some of the usual suspects, Kelvin, that were discussed, dairy included.
Yeah, dairy was included in the bilateral meeting between U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai and Canada's Trade Minister Mary Ng. There was mention of Canada's dairy tariff rate quotas, or TRQs, and the policy. The U.S. wants to see more changes there. So the U.S. continues to push that. In terms of the trilateral meeting, I think, like you said, a lot of the usual suspects in terms of inclusivity in fostering small businesses owned by women and indigenous communities, and those types of priorities, those discussions. They also talked about North American competitiveness, jobs. One issue that continues to come up, especially on the U.S.-Canada relationship, has to do with this forced labor, products made with forced labor. The U.S. has cracked down on imports from China under this reason, and Canada has not to the same extent. And so there's pressure on the Canadian government, it sounds like, to do more in terms of enforcing and the parts of the USMCA, the commitments that have been made to prohibit the importation of goods produced using force or compulsory labor, implementation of that. So that's something to watch in terms of what Canada does there. Could potentially affect costs, make things more expensive if imports are restricted. In many ways, though, overshadowing this whole meeting, though, is the review of the USMCA or CUSMA deal in 2 years' time. So this was the 4th annual meeting of the trade representatives from the 3 countries. They have 2 years. The 6th year is the year where there's this review scheduled. And this is something we talked about on the new Ag Policy Connection podcast this week, focused on trade. We have Canada's former chief trade negotiator, Steve Verhoeven, on the podcast. And I asked him, is this a review or is this a renegotiation? Because we've been hearing both words. And he said, it's a review. Canada wants it to only be a review, not a renegotiation. So that is the lingo that is, I guess, preferential in terms of the scope, which Canada, the Canadian side at least, is hoping how this process goes.
But all it takes is one country like Mexico to say, you know what, we've reviewed and we don't like. And so that it only takes one, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'd say Canada's probably been the most quiet and has the most, would like to see this just pass quickly and keep status quo, least disruption as possible. The U.S. has certainly also, Catherine Tai has certainly drawn a bunch of lines in the sand, dairy being one of them. Also this Chinese labor issue. There's other aspects too where the U.S. has certainly drawn, and Mexico too, drawing lines in the sand. So yeah, it's certainly going to be a challenge to keep it to only a review, not a renegotiation.
Yeah, go,
so,
Lyndsey.
okay. Yeah, I have a question. So was this one of the meetings, because I listened to Carlo Dade, who was on the show earlier this week. Is this meeting, this is a meeting that has to happen kind of idea? Is it?
Yeah, this is an annual meeting. It's part of the agreement.
It's like part of the agreement. It's part of the framework of how this all works. Do things ever get actually worked out at these meetings, or is this like an airing of grievances ahead so that, we save it all up for the review? It feels like to me like this might be, wouldn't it be great if we could work some of these things out before a review?
Well, I'm sure there is a lot of legwork of substance, in terms of stating, okay, here's what our issue is. There is, this is a lot of work behind the scenes. Staff, obviously for example, Trade Minister Ng was there, and same with Catherine Tai, the USTR. But this is part of the staff's doing some legwork and working, trying to get on the same page. What are some of the issues? What are the gaps in prep for as we get closer to that review? Is that fair, Kelvin?
Yeah, exactly. And this is something the deputy ministers, they talked about. The deputies will be meeting again before the end of the year to assess the progress that they made on all these priorities that they did discuss. So a lot of this is the stuff that they talk about in the press releases and news conferences after the meeting is the stuff that they agree on. It's the low-hanging fruit. It's the stuff like fostering small businesses that are owned by people who've maybe face discrimination or the labor issues in Mexico that the U.S. continues to raise, those types of things. It's more the stuff that certainly it's easier to reach agreement on. The stuff that's hard to deal with, that's not going to be resolved at these annual meetings.
What I would hope that Canada was loud about, and this didn't come out definitely in the communiques, but what I would hope that Canada was loud about was okay, so the U.S. is re-stepping up its game when it comes to tariffs on China. Fine. And Canada also showed some support last week. Our American friends, our American partners, Minister Ng kind of phrases that way. So Canada clearly choosing the side that they want to be on this one, and they're choosing the right side, in my opinion. I would imagine Canada was saying, okay, listen, this is fine, but don't also turn that tactic on us. And this is a time for Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. to really be using this agreement to leverage each other to really move our economies forward, not to get into this adversarial treating U.S. treating Canada or U.S. treating Mexico or Mexico treating the U.S. no different than we would treat China, because those are entirely different things. We have disruptions. We have pieces that we disagree on, indeed, and we will. There's no trade agreement that doesn't have disagreements. But let's not turn this tariff tool on each other. I hope that was Canada's position. I have no idea if they did that. And I see Kelvin's nodding his head, Lyndsey. I think he agrees.
I agree. That has to be Canada's position. And North America approach is the best scenario here for Canada. Otherwise, we are isolated and iced out by the U.S. That's not a good position to be in. So a North America-wide approach or a Canada-U.S.-wide approach is the best case scenario here, and something that, again, Steve Verhoeven talks about on the Ag Policy Connection podcast that would be in Canada's best interest. And so that means aligning with the U.S. on some of these issues where the U.S. says, take a side here, Canada. Are you going to continue to import stuff made in China by forced labor that we've asked you not to, or not? So that's something to watch, whether Canada will continue to do that. It is a challenge, though, in terms of our agricultural exports to some of these export markets like China, where potentially this puts things at risk or in jeopardy. And so, yeah, it's certainly something. It's a difficult scenario that the Canadian government is in right now in terms of trying to keep all doors open for exports while also maintaining this the highest priority has to be maintaining trade. It's in our national interest, of course, number one, maintaining trade with the U.S. So and that relationship. So yeah, I expect that will have been a message that Catherine or that Mary Ng had. One issue where Canada could potentially push back on the U.S. is the Inflation Reduction Act, massive subsidies going into green energy and processing and some of those types of things. That's where I think Canada has a card to play and some leverage, saying, hang on, U.S., what are you doing here, offering these massive subsidies that are altering the market and altering trade flows and things like that? That's not what you say that you stand for, kind of thing. And so that's where one issue to also watch, whether, I don't know whether that will be said publicly, but I'm wondering whether Mary Ng's office raised that as well.
And sucking capital south out of Canada.
That's what I mean. It's hurting Canadian competitiveness.
It is.
Yeah.
Competitiveness, Lyndsey, hey? Yeah?
Right.
I
feel like it's something we've talked about on this show before, maybe. A time or two. So, but in hearing even that discussion, Kelvin, I mean, laying this all out of the delicate balance that Canada has in being trade dependent, but we need to keep our relationship with the U.S., obviously. At the same time, like, we're in a very precarious position where, we have a relationship, but how much power, how much leverage do we really have? So in a lot of ways, this is where the diplomacy comes in of saying, here's how we're better together. And here's, yes, exactly that, how Canada will take the U.S.'s side on these things that are important to the U.S. so that we can play along and have those kinds of discussions. Because realistically, when it comes to just sheer volume and dollars, what the U.S. decides to do has just a huge impact here, being their northern neighbor.
Well, one of the things, and Lyndsey, one of the things we are benefiting from is that, this week I have heard a lot of commentary about how, the resilience of the U.S. economy, and almost in this sort of roaring 20s kind of movement. One phrase that I was kind of exposed to the beginning, last week, I think we were talking about this, Arlen Suderman from StoneX had said reinflation. And I have heard this several times this week. Now, I hope that inflation does not come back to Canada, but a strong, resilient U.S. economy based on our adjacency, based on our integration, there's some spillover effects into the Canadian economy that would be good for Canada, Lyndsey, I think, if this is the case.
Well, potentially. And we want that, right? We want good things. My concern when we look at some of the fundamental differences between Canada and the US, when it comes to affordability, when it comes to housing costs, when it comes to all these things that play into it, and the productivity question that capital flowing in and productivity, et cetera, the US doing well is great. And that's usually good for Canada, and that's wonderful, but we're not the same economies. And I worry that, things going great for them, wonderful, awesome, if we're still struggling to afford, housing, et cetera, it only gets worse for us. It doesn't work the same in Canada. And that is a huge concern.
I think that's a path we're headed down. I think we are going to see more divergence, especially, look at inflation. In the U.S., they're talking, like Shaun said, about reinflation. Meanwhile, here in Canada, we saw this week the new CPI numbers out, Consumer Price Index, showing inflation decelerated to 2.7% year over year from 2.9% in March. So decrease in inflation, and that supports the Bank of Canada in early June. Again, making that first rate cut that we've talked about. The market right now, I think it's about a 50% chance the market is pricing in for a 25 basis point rate cut at the next Bank of Canada rate decision in June. Meanwhile, the U.S. talk around the Fed is moving in the other direction. And so what does that do to the value of our currency here in Canada? I think in many ways we should be getting ready for a lower Canadian dollar, which could be good for the basis for cash prices for crops that we grow, but also makes things more expensive, and again could support inflation here in Canada if our dollar is weaker and the things that we import become more expensive.
Yeah, great points. Okay, we've got to take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio. It's the RealAg Issues Panel. We'll be back right after this.
Choose Viatude fungicide and unleash best-in-class sclerotinia protection in canola and premium protection against white mold in soybeans. Viatude contains a powerful premix of Onmira Active and prothioconazole. This unique combo delivers high-performance disease control, crop safety, mix compatibility, resistance management, and advanced mobility for excellent coverage and superior plant protection. Choose Viatude fungicide for stronger, more vigorous crops.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Shaun Haney, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, all of Real Agriculture here for the RealAg Issues Panel. We've been talking about this rail strike, or lack thereof. This was the week where potentially there could have been a rail strike between the Teamsters Union as well with CPKC, still getting used to saying that, and CN Rail. It's been relatively pushed back possibly to July, Kelvin. What is concerning here is with this review by CIRB is the fact that potentially negotiations are not going, like they've been kind of cut off maybe. There's not, CPKC was out this week saying that it's shut down at this point. That's not good.
Yeah, the leadership from the railways and the union, at least in CPKC, that rail line's case, they met until May 21st, so earlier this week, but they haven't met since then, and there was no progress made. For their bargaining dates, they say, have not been scheduled as of a couple days ago. So, yeah, it looks like right now talks have broken down. It's the precedent for the Canada Industrial Relations Board review is very wide in terms of how long this review could take. There's talk about potentially the review being completed by mid-July. So the main thing they're reviewing here under the federal labor minister's mandate is the safety impact if there is a rail strike of this scope with both of Canada's main railways going on strike at the same time. What would be affected? One of the main things they're looking at there is propane availability and the impact that could have on Canadians. So there's potential after this review is completed that certain aspects of the railway couldn't be shut down if it meant that propane supplies would be affected. And of course, there would be implications there on the agriculture side of things in areas where propane is transported by rail to heat barns or greenhouses or to dry grain. I'm not sure. We'd have to do some digging in terms of how much propane actually moves by train or how the logistics there. But yeah, right now, until that review is completed, which we, again, don't have any timeline, basically, it could be middle of July, it could be longer, could be shorter. After that review is completed, there is a mandatory 72-hour period, three days, basically, that the railways or the union would have to give before a strike or a lockout could take place. So, yeah, right now looking at mid-July, which again, from a farming cycle, not great in terms of a potential strike on the railways as harvest season gets underway.
Yeah, we're past the potash requirement for spring planting in the U.S., so we're out of that window, but we're kind of getting into the new crop window there and with, you think about Western Canada, Lyndsey, and a better crop looks like it's coming than we've had the past number of years, so we're going to have some crop to move.
Even in a not great year, we still have a lot of crop to move. And given if we've got a really decent or even an average year, we're going to have a lot of crop to move. And realistically, while maybe our peak movement happens in the middle of winter, et cetera, there's so much that needs to happen before then. We also, of course, as we've talked about before, we're dealing with, some bins that are maybe still full that farmers would like to move before then. So that's going to be putting pressure on these things. But let's face it, we have such a congested system as it is. Any sort of delay or strike, there is no good time of year for it. So I'm hopeful, let's push for this, that negotiations continue while we're waiting to see, this whole thing happen. And hopefully we can avoid a strike entirely.
Yeah, and CPKC as an example is, they were talking about being the first, North American rail company. This has impacts in Canada and the U.S. There's no question about it. Go ahead, Kelvin.
Strike would only affect Canadian workers, though. It wouldn't affect
yes,
absolutely. But
you're right. In terms of overall value chains or supply chains, it would, be cause disruption. Right now, with the review process, there's a bunch of farm groups were among the groups that submitted letters to the review board this week. They have a deadline of May 31st to file replies. So we know at least the review won't be done before then, and then it'll probably take them a few weeks, maybe even a couple months to for that board to work through all those submissions and consider what needs to be done. So yeah, right now it's not imminent, but could be on the horizon still.
I've been working on a project the last number of weeks I haven't really talked about, but it has to do with innovation in Canada. And at some point we'll dive into that here on this show. But in working with some of the groups I have and stakeholders, farm groups to industry, one of the questions that I've asked, and I'm going to ask, you have no idea what I'm going to ask you, but I'm going to throw it your way right now. Let's just say Deputy Minister Stephanie Beck for AAFC is sitting with us right here on this panel. Okay. And we haven't had her on the show before, but if she's here and there was one ask that you have of her to benefit Canadian agriculture as a whole, like I'm not talking just to innovation, I'm just talking in general. What would that ask be? What would we say to her if she was here? I know some of her staff listens to the show, so maybe this is some free consulting. Who wants to go first?
It's like at the restaurant where I don't know what I'm going to order yet, so
so you're like, hey, Lyndsey, go first. And if it were our social media coordinator, Paige, she knows. She just gets chicken strips, and then away you go. So that's the key. Is just you should always have a go-to, Kelvin.
I go with the Cobb salad.
Yeah, see, we all have our go-to. Everybody tell us your go-to. Okay, so this is you did surprise us with this. We had no time to prepare, so I don't know. Picking one thing isn't fair. I could go with the angle of respecting what is possible, what we're capable of, that I feel like as an industry we often sort of are fighting for being recognized as having the potential and actually believing in the sector enough to see it through, and something along that conversation of like, I don't know, I think as an industry we talk a lot about what agriculture already contributes to the GDP, is there room to do more, like that there's all this potential. Okay, that's great. So I guess we start there, but then the second part is how do we achieve that potential? And I really wonder, would there be a way to communicate that we have to have this lens of achieving that potential being put on the policies and the programs we're going to put out, that somewhere we have to actually be thinking about the action items that get us to achieving that potential, not just talking about what the potential is.
It's kind of like, referring to the Barton report all the time, but actually not doing the Barton report.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good one. Kelvin, here we go.
I'm having a tough time coming up with a specific thing, but I would say, so there are some examples though that come to mind, and my general advice would probably be focus on public goods. And that's a general in terms of what's the role of government. Focus on public goods that the private market isn't investing in. So infrastructure for export would be one of those major areas. Focus on the things that equip all the private businesses, including every farm across Canada, for success. So export infrastructure would be one. Trade, market access would be another one. Investment in technology and research in areas where private stakeholders don't have the same incentive to invest that broader economy government would have. So yeah, a lot of those types of things focus on fostering the success of, like Lyndsey said, the success of individual farmers. Maybe second on the list too would be more of a communications thing too. I seem to notice this more often where in Ottawa, in conversations, as soon as agriculture comes up, people feel intimidated and feel unequipped to talk about agriculture, and they feel like that's a totally different world. And these are decision makers. These are deputy ministers. You could look at the Environment Committee, House of Commons Environment Committee met this week with Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault and some of his deputies speaking there. Some of the things, as soon as they were asked questions about the carbon price on carbon or carbon tax on farms, they weren't confident in their answers, and they weren't sure. You got the sense they weren't sure what they were talking about. And that seems to be a theme lately, where agriculture just doesn't get the respect it deserves. And so I don't know if there's a way that, so I maybe have two requests: and focus on public goods and make sure it gets the respect it deserves in Ottawa.
Yeah. I've thought about this, as I've been asking people about this over the past number of weeks. And I think it's focus on creating an environment for this industry or others to thrive, instead of being like a participant, or instead of being like, I think a lot of times what we're doing is we're trying to, and this isn't just a slight at the federal government. This is, I think, our industry in general. There's a lot of looking towards the federal government to solve the problems, more so than there should be at times. We don't need to create another puppet show. Like with just different puppets and different strings. We really need to government needs to be a catalyst and create the environment to attract people into the country, to allow the industry to really thrive. But we've also, from an industry standpoint, we got to have the drive to want to accomplish that. And I think that's also another issue. But I think there's all three of these very, very, very much connect. So if anybody has, I can tell some of the emails we're going to get, because every time I ask any question, I get the same thing. But go ahead.
There's also a self-reflection aspect to this too, that I think there's a chicken and egg issue here. Government tells us that they can solve all our problems, and then we expect and go to government for them to solve all our problems. So
100%.
That's broad brushing it, oversimplifying it in a big way. But in many ways, like you say, Shaun, some of this falls on industry to also to take these risks and take chances and be more entrepreneurial and those types of things.
We are far too risk adverse. I fundamentally believe that in this country, and I hope that changes. And what can we do to change and create more entrepreneurial spirit? That's a whole nother show. Hey, we got to get out of here. And I know it's the Canadian long weekend, Victoria Day long weekend this past weekend. It's Memorial Day weekend. Oh, Sunday is a great day of racing. Oh, if you're a race fan, Sunday is where it is at, Lyndsey. I know you'll be watching all three big races between IndyCar, NASCAR, and F1. She says no. Okay, Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
I will. Thank you, Shaun. There's fighting in NASCAR now too, Lyndsey, just like in hockey. So.
Oh, there wasn't. Yeah, that was quite the punch last week. Ricky Stanton.
Still not watching.
Oh,
okay.
It was a missed punch. I
Kyle Busch has had that coming for a long time. Hey, Lyndsey, have yourself a great weekend.
Have a great weekend, you guys.
We just do our best to turn this into a sports show. I'm just telling you. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks everybody for getting Thanks everybody for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. How many times do I have to do this to get it right? Cheers. Talk to you guys later.